What is going on, alpha males and gunfighters? I think I'm going to put this episode out on both podcasts because it's germane to both. I originally thought about it because I did a lot of hard hunting way in the backcountry this year for deer and elk. And this is one of the topics that was winning the poll when I put out, what do you guys want content on? Minimalist survival kit. And I was thinking of it mostly in the regards of backcountry hunting and hiking. That's what I love to do, scouting, hunting, hiking. I love doing that. I live in what I would consider the Wild West, Greater Yellowstone ecosystem, mostly for that reason. There are a few other reasons, but I'd say mostly the hunting and the open, wide open land and wilderness areas. But it applies to so much more. You don't have to be into guns. There's a lot of people that can't even own guns, sadly. There's a lot of people that can barely own guns, like Canadians. But I know you can own some guns, but you can't even own a handgun. It's super sad. But it applies to more people than just gun people or hunters. So I think I'll probably put it out on both. But the minimalist kit you need for survival, that's what we're going to talk about today. Welcome to the podcast, where hopefully we keep God Almighty at the center with biblical Judeo-Christian values and real-world first-hand experience. Okay, now this is going to be a contentious topic. I already know people are going to disagree. That's fine. It's your life. You do what you want as long as you're following the laws of God. If you have better ideas, right, these are not shall. It's not like you shall carry a tourniquet. But I'm trying to help you here. A couple of things in mind. As long as you dress appropriately, and that's a big one. As long as you dress appropriately, like you're not wearing cotton out in the wilderness, you could probably survive several days out in the wilderness just with the clothes on your back, and you should dress as such. Like if I get soaking wet, well, I'm wearing wool, so I'll probably be okay. If I get stuck out here overnight because I get lost or break my leg or whatever, I'll be okay, because just with clothes on my back, I probably won't die. But that is pure survival, like you would survive. But I'm talking about a minimalist kit that you relatively not be completely miserable, minus whatever circumstances got you into the survival situation. And this is a minimalist kit. I'll often go out and rucking and staying out in the wilderness with a lot of kit. But let's say this year when I was going to punch my elk tag, elk are big and heavy. I don't know if you know, newsflash, but it took my wife and I several trips to get our elk out. I hunt and hike way in the backcountry. So my pack needed to be mostly empty, right? I had a few things in there, but it needed to be mostly empty because I'm filling it with elk. So I'm not carrying everything in the kitchen sink and freeze-dried meals and all this stuff. I'm carrying very minimalist stuff. So just for this reason, if I get called out, I'll be okay. By God's grace. Now, I've done entire episodes on EDC. This should be in addition to your EDC. And I'm a big fan of an EDC so that you don't really have to change much, whether you're in the city or in the country. I've said, like, we'll come back to knives, but I say my big criteria for an EDC knife, an everyday carry knife, is I want it to be able to be a fighting tool, a get-off-me tool, a defensive tool. Even though I carry a gun, it's my secondary defensive tool. So it needs to be able to be strong enough, long enough, and robust enough for that task. It also needs to be big and strong enough and robust enough and of an appropriate shape so that I can skin a deer or an elk. Now, yes, I could sharpen a piece of rock. I could flint knap something, or I could crush my piece of brass and make a knife grinding out a rock and get a deer butchered. But why? Like a knife that's... I would not feel handicapped if I had to butcher an elk or a deer with said knife, and I wouldn't feel like I was under knifed for that. So that's my two criteria. So getting back to that everyday carry, things that I generally carry every day. Another important concept for this episode is that the things that are super important should be on your body, not in your pack. I have before, like I did this year actually, thinking about it when I was by God's grace punching my elk tag. When I got my elk this year, I was spot and stalk and still hunting, as I love to do, and walking up on these elk, and I dropped my pack because I wanted to be quiet, and the pack sometimes rubs on stuff, and it's harder to maneuver, especially quietly, with a pack on. So I dropped my pack when I got close-ish to the elk, several hundred yards from the elk, I dropped my pack. Well, if something really bad had happened when I had dropped my pack and I couldn't get back to it, or I couldn't find the pack for whatever reason, I have the important things on my body, on my person. So the most important things should be on your person. And if there's any redundancy, you should spread that out. Like if I have two forms of starting a fire, a good practice is to have one on your lower half, like one on your belt or one in your pocket, and then another one in your jacket. So that if whatever you take your jacket off, you put your jacket on your pack and it falls off and you lose it, you have another way to start a fire. If all your fire starting stuff is in your jacket and you lose your jacket, well, now you're in a bad place. You could probably still make a fire if you know what you're doing, but why? Just spread it out, like a lighter in your pants pocket and let's say a ferrocerium rod in your jacket or whatever, but spread it out if it's that important. Like generally, I'll have a primary knife and little teeny tiny knife. Or if I'm out to get elk or deer, a really sharp like scalpel type knife for really fine work. Not needed, but it's really nice to have. So I'll put that somewhere other than the same place where I have my primary knife. Just concepts here. But for EDC, a firearm, a knife, a tourniquet, a way to start a fire, some type of string, cordage, and some type of water purification device. Now, I went through that pretty quick. You might think, I'm just going to bushcraft my way with just a knife. Okay, well, you probably could make a tourniquet using bushcrafty type stuff and making your own cordage and your own rope, but not in the time you're going to bleed out. We have tourniquets today. Why not just carry a tourniquet? Now, the Cat Gen 7 is like the creme de la creme, the top-notch tourniquet. Probably not what I'm going to tell you in this situation. Probably have either a rat tourniquet or a S.R.T or a Slishman device because they're multifunctional. If you know what you're doing and you obviously need training, take TCCC or something like it, Tactical Combat Casualty Care. But those can also be used for other things. You can use them as a pressure bandage. You can use them if you need to make a quick running line to put your shelter over. You can just use it real quick. Again, you can make cordage, but when it's 33 degrees and raining and you're getting wet and cold really fast, just have cordage and or use your tourniquet as a really nice bungee style kind of ridge line for your shelter. And obviously, if you need a tourniquet, you probably need it right now. So just having one is really nice. Now, I'm not going to sit here and plug brands and different kinds of knives, but as I mentioned, those two criteria. Can you fight with it? Can you butcher a deer and elk with it? And or whatever is in your area, right? Clean a fish with it, whatever. Not that you can't eat a fish raw with just your mouth, but it's nice to have a knife. And you're going to want a knife anyway, just in case. But a knife that's big enough for those two tasks will take care of anything else. I need to, what's the bushcrafty, big bushcraft, conspiracy push? You need a baton wood. Guys, I've spent a lot of time in the backcountry, a lot more than most people. I'm sure there's many people that have spent more time than me. I've spent a lot of time in the backcountry I lived for years off grid. The amount of times I've ever had to baton wood is zero. That's something I think people do to look cool. If I'm being honest, in their back 40, acting like they're in the wilderness, you want a nice pretty fire for the camera. I don't care if my fire's pretty. I care that it's on fire and it's hot. I don't care how it looks. Right? If I have a stick that's too big, I'll just burn it in half and put two halves in the fire. Or an easier way I found to do it, you just pick up a rock and smash sticks if you want smaller sticks. Less time, less effort, less likely to hurt yourself. You don't need to baton wood. Maybe there's somewhere where batoning wood has saved somebody's life. I don't know. I couldn't speak to that. But if you want a pretty fire, then baton wood. If you just want a fire, you probably don't need a baton wood. So your knife probably doesn't need a baton wood. Nor are you probably going to have to beat it through a railroad tire or whatever these ridiculous tests are. it should be a fixed blade knife. I'm a big fan of fixed blade knives. I EDC a fixed blade knife pretty much every day, and I tell you guys, and I've talked about that ad nausea on my EDC episodes, carry a fixed blade knife just like I tell you to carry a full-size fighting handgun, like a man. But even if you carry a folding knife day to day, when you're out in the backcountry, I'd really recommend a fixed blade knife. It's just simpler, easier, less likely to break. But if all I had was like a buck 110 Slim as a folding knife, I would be fine with that. I can butcher a deer with a buck 110 Slim. I can fight with a buck 110 Slim. I actually used to carry one when I was professionally guiding as a professional hunter. Like buck 110 Slim will get it done. But for a primary knife, I would like a fixed blade knife. And again, big enough for those two tasks. I like a drop, or actually I like a clip point. You actually may like a drop point. But whatever. I mean, just pick one. A good strong knife. 3 to 5 inch blade is plenty. It doesn't have to be a Rambo knife. It doesn't have to be a Crocodile Dundee knife. It just has to be a good practical size knife. Robust enough for the task, with a handle that's not going to slip in your hand if it's cold or bloody or whatever. So that. A fire starting device, they're so light and so easy. I'd say have two. I would say just have a lighter. It's just way easier. Yeah, you can make a fire with sticks, with just sticks, with making a bow drill. But do you want to be doing that again when you've broken your leg and you're freezing and it's starting to rain and you have a hard time finding the materials? Probably not. Just have an easy way to start a fire. A lighter or matches as a primary, and then something like a ferrocerium rod. Ferrocerium rods are good. They're simple. They're easy. You can also use them to sharpen a knife. They're good to have. They're so simple. It's literally a metal alloy rod. I guess you could break one, but you'd have to try really hard. And they work after they get wet. They could be wet for days, and they'll still work. So a ferrocerium rod is your secondary. Maybe even if you're primary, if you're familiar and you're good at starting a fire with a ferrocerium rod. But a fire starting, again, I would say have two of the fire starting if you can. I like to keep a ferrocerium rod, even day-to-day, generally EDC. I just carry a small ferrocerium rod attached to my knife sheath because I'm probably going to use a knife if I'm starting a fire. It's just nice to have it there. Doesn't take up a lot of space. A lot of times you can just attach it to the sheath. I also carry a small button compass on the back of my sheath. Make sure you take it off the knife if you're going to use it because the metal can throw off the compass, but not a big deal there. I talked about cordage. I'll generally carry some cordage in my pocket, and I also have some extra cordage wrapped on the knife. 550 cord is kind of the standard. I'm going to tell you for this, if it's an ultralight minimalist EDC, not I'm going out to live in the backcountry, like I'm going out in the backcountry, and if I get stranded, I'll be okay. I like microcord. Microcord I think is better for this. Also, I like Spectra or Spider Wire is like the name brand. Spectra, it's like softer than silk, stronger than steel. It's very, very strong. You can also use it for snares and fishing line. It actually primarily is supposed to be fishing line, but it's also very good for snares or sewing up stuff, mending boots, which I've done, making bird snares, which I've done with fishing line. It's good for that kind of stuff. Extra cordage, it's very strong. I've never, thankfully, had to use it as stitches, but you could. So I like that even better. Now let's talk about shelter. Yes, you can make shelter, and you should know how to make shelter, and you should know how to improvise shelter and just find shelter. Like a lot of times you can find a really good evergreen tree that's real thick and dense, and even when it starts to snow and stuff, for a long time it will stay dry under that conifer tree. Like that stuff you should know, and you should know how to break a few branches under the conifer tree and make it even better shelter. But for this minimalist kit, I'm going to include emergency shelter. One of those saved my butt this year, actually. I got stranded out in a rainstorm, a thunderstorm. I would have lived without it, but I would have been miserable. The emergency bivvies, I think tack bivvy is one. There are some other ones. You could probably use these more than once. I consider them a single time out in the wilderness use. This is the second time I've had to use one, like in a semi-emergency, freezing cold. They work really well. The cheap version of this is a space blanket. After I used mine this year, because I had to use mine, I just replaced it with a space blanket in my back pocket. But the emergency bivvies are small, they're lightweight, they're way, way better. They're not a gimmick, they actually work. Now, they're not a wall tent with a heater, but they are so much better than nothing, and they'll keep you dry. So again, you got your tourniquet or your cordage, you just make a simple, line between 2 trees, drape it over somewhere that's dry and that's not going to flood. But that just goes to having the knowledge, like putting the shelter in the proper place, right? You don't want to put it in a dry, creek bed when it starts to rain. But putting it in a proper place, out of the wind anyway, and just, making some stakes with some branches, it's not that hard. You're looking at hopefully a few minutes to have shelter. Instead of trying to make one bushcraft style, like, cutting limbs with your knife and all that kind of stuff. Just carry a space blanket or a tack bivvy or emergency bivvy in your pocket. Now, a lot of times I'll carry a poncho because I like a poncho, a military style poncho, for a lot of things. I can't remember the amount of nights I've spent sleeping under a military poncho. I would consider that, though, a proper tent. Like, we're getting out of the minimalist kit. But if you want to take an emergency poncho, like a military poncho, those are fantastic. I would consider that. Sometimes I'll go out where I'm going to intentionally just be in the wilderness and stay in the wilderness with just a military poncho. You're not going to be the most comfortable. You'll probably have to sleep in the fetal position, curled around a stick, but you'll be dry and you'll be relatively comfortable under a military poncho. If you consider that a minimalist kit, then that's going to be better than, a space blanket. But completely minimalist, a space blanket is way, way better than nothing. And somewhere in the middle are those tack bivvies, emergency bivvies. They're a bit bigger than a space blanket, but they're quite a bit smaller and lighter than a military poncho. So you decide there what you want to do. And again, you can bushcraft a shelter, and if you have the right clothing, you will probably survive anyway. Your clothing should be relatively, hydrophobic, water repellent, and warm enough even when wet. But, man, it's just so easy to have a piece of Mylar or a tack bivvy or something like that. It's just so light and handy. I'm not anti-technology. They're so easy to have. Like, you break your leg or you've lost a lot of blood and you finally get it stopped. Maybe you don't, or you're not able to just build a shelter. You could just literally lay that thing on the ground, either any of them, and roll up in it. And you'll probably more likely to survive. This year when I got caught out in a thunderstorm out in the Rockies, I literally just sat on my pack and draped the emergency bivvy over me to just keep me relatively dry until it was over. And again, I probably wouldn't have been dead, but I would have been way more miserable if I didn't have that emergency bivvy. I would consider that an essential. I mentioned a compass. You should also know how to navigate without a compass, but a compass is really nice. Also, I generally EDC a small flashlight. This may or may not be something you want to carry. It may be safer if it starts to get dark to just stay out there than to try to make it out if it's in technical rough terrain. Or many times if there's a decent clear sky and a moon, you can walk around all night if you just know how to navigate at night with just the moon and the stars and navigate that way. So you may or may not want to have a flashlight. I would not say it's necessary, but it's a big help. If you're carrying any kind of pack at all, even if it's a fanny pack, probably don't let it be a fanny pack, but, even if it is, if you have any kind of pack storage at all, one of the first things you should have in there for a minimalist survival kit is spare socks. Can you hike on bloody feet? Yes, you can, but it's miserable. It's better to just prevent that and change your socks. You end up having to go a different way or go a lot farther. You get lost and have to end up going a lot farther than you thought, or your feet just get wet or they're sweaty. Just being able to change your socks, that's a big one. So any kind of pack storage at all, extra socks. Ask any infantryman like myself the importance of extra socks. It's just one of those things. It's worth its weight in gold if you need extra socks. That said, your primary socks that you're wearing should not be cotton. Give some actual thought and spend some money on some good socks for your primary socks. Now, I touched on guns. I do a whole podcast, Gunfighter Life. You may be listening to this on Gunfighter Life. I do a whole podcast about this gun versus that gun, and you could sit there and debate, should I have a 4-inch 357 Magnum revolver or should I have a 10 millimeter? Well, you should probably have a shotgun. You probably have a 12-gauge shotgun because it's good for all kinds of stuff, from quail, doves, grouse to bear defense, if it's for pure survival. But or a scout rifle or something like that, which is fantastic. But I'm not going to get into that. You should probably have a gun. Your primary thing, no matter where you are. I live in Grizz country. Mountain lions, wolves, bears, oh my, right? And I've had some nasty run-ins with bears over the years. I'm usually armed anyway, though. But your primary thing you should be concerned about is people. People are your biggest threat, even in the wilderness. Look at how many people get murdered in national parks and national forests and the backwoods, right? It happens. The amount of people killed by bear every year is a few. The amount of people killed by people every year is a huge number. And yeah, you're probably slightly safer when you're in the wilderness from people than you are at your average Walmart or gas station or church, sadly, with mass shootings and stuff. But I'm a big proponent of your primary defense is still against people. So you're a man. Have a gun on you. And again, you could debate whether you want a scout rifle or a 12 gauge or you're only going to take a handgun. What's the best handgun? And get into ballistics nerdism, which I love. But that's not this episode. Have a gun. Guns are also useful for other things like signaling. They're loud. You can also use them to start a fire. If you know how to pull a bullet, you've got gunpowder and you've got a primer. You can use your firearm to make a fire. It's called a firearm. It makes fire. If you can pull a bullet, put a little piece of cotton or a little piece of some flammable material inside there with just a primer or maybe a grain or two of powder, depending on the firearm, and if you know what you're doing, you can start a fire with just that, and it's a lot faster than trying to improvise one. And obviously for defense. So again, if I'm going out to live in the bush for a while, I'm going to want more stuff than this. But I think this is a good minimalist kit that covers most of the bases. Now, you could have all this planning, and you could have, a 90-pound pack full of the latest and greatest, survival supplies that are on all the cool guy stuff. And you could fall down a ravine and break your neck. I get it, but have something. And if you're not planning on staying out, but if it's an emergency, you might have to, but you want to be ultra light, I think this is a pretty good minimalist kit. And I'm not just saying this from theory. I go out all the time. I love being out in the bush. I had to go into work today. Private security contracting, jungle boots, war belt, body armor, but I would much rather be on a mountainside somewhere or beside a stream in the middle of nowhere. And I routinely do that. And this minimalist kit that I'm talking about, I'm fine with it. I will say, you can live a long time without food. But if you want to bring calories, it doesn't have to be anything fancy. It doesn't have to be a freeze-dried meal or astronaut ice cream or whatever the regular people eat when they go out in the backcountry. Nuts are a fine substitute. They're high in fat. They've got fiber. They've got protein. It's a wonderful, natural, just food source that's calorie dense. This is not the time to be on a diet. I'm also not going to tell you to pack a honey bun. Just nuts of some kind. Almonds, cashews, peanuts are ridiculously cheap. Peanut butter, a 1 pound, 16-ounce jar of peanut butter, preferably plastic. Fine. You can eat it with your finger. You can eat it with your knife. You can eat it with a stick. It's a ton of calories in 1 jar of peanut butter. Just throw a jar of peanut butter in your pack if you have any kind of pack at all. If you're not taking a pack, just some of those sleeves that you get that are like 50 cents or $1 or $1.50 with inflation, whatever they are now, like sleeves of peanuts. Just have, 4 of those in different pockets. That's quite a bit of calories. And, you don't need it. You'll live without it. And you can get calories. You should know how to forage. You should know how to find common forageable things. I routinely forage, and I enjoy it. But it's just easier. Again, you've hurt yourself. You're not going out. It's dark. It's raining. It's nice to just have calories on you. So think about that. On the food, also water. Water purification. The easy one for a short-term acute scenario, just have those water purification tablets. Those little tiny iodine or chlorine tablets, they weigh almost nothing. You can melt the end of a straw and clamp it down and put 10 of them in a quarter of a drinking straw and have those in a pocket somewhere or split them up into 2 pockets. They will purify a bunch of water. You can also make it a lot thicker solution of chlorine or iodine and clean a wound with it. So double duty there. And they're just light and easy And if you've ever had the displeasure of having Giardia, which I have, it's nasty. Just water purification. And those tablets are so easy. Now, if you're going out for a really long time, it might be easier to go with a different option. And yeah, there's the Sawyer Minis, which are okay, and there's the Life Straws, which are less okay. And they're fine if you want to carry them. But honestly, just the water tabs, they're just simple and easy. You're going to need a container, but if you had those small plastic bags that your peanuts came in, or the plastic container your peanuts came in, guess what? That's a container. An empty plastic bag that probably some of your supplies are in, that's a container. So I'm not even going to put a container on the list. But if you want a minimalist container, literally a 1 gallon, or what are they, 1 gallon or half gallon? The big Ziploc bags. If you absolutely needed to, you could cut off a piece of your emergency bivvy or your space blanket and fold it and origami it, and guess what? That's a container. So I don't even think you need to bring an extra container. But if you're out hiking or stuff like that anyway, you probably are going to have a water bottle. I'm not even going to include that in the survival kit. But if you really are somewhere where you may not have any container, just a simple plastic bag folded up will probably be enough. Doesn't have to be some Gucci expensive titanium thing. Now, I have really expensive water purification stuff when I go out to stay in the wilderness, but that's not this episode. This is a minimalist kit. All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed that minimalist kit. Again, there's a ton of other stuff you may or may not want, and obviously your climate is going to dictate. If you're somewhere that's just nasty with bugs, anywhere east of the Mississippi and south of the Mason-Dixon line, right? Bug spray is probably going to be in there. Because, yeah, you'll live without bug spray, but it's going to be miserable. You're probably going to have those one-time use, single-serving insect wipes. If you're of Irish descent and you're in the Southwest, Arizona, New Mexico, you're probably going to want sunblock. Can you live without sunblock? Yeah, but it's a small tube. You get my point. Specific things for your specific area. And obviously, I don't know where you are, so I don't know what that might be for you, but use common sense. All right, guys, with that, I'm going to close this out. I appreciate you. I appreciate all that you do. Okay. Tactical verse of the day. I'm going to get to that, but I'm going to say, this may not seem like it's relevant, but it is relevant. I don't have TV. I've never seen one of these survival shows, whatever they are, because I was living in the bush before that. But it's drama. It's reality TV is about as real as that honey bun is real food. It's a cheap imitation. It's not. It's made for drama, okay? The wilderness is not trying to kill you. It's indifferent to you. It's a natural environment. Don't be scared of it. Don't be a fearful little beta male. Be an alpha male. Be strong. And use common sense, but don't be afraid of the wilderness. Jesus was not afraid of the wilderness. And again, it is relevant, tying it in here, Mark chapter 6. And he said unto them, Come ye yourselves apart into a desert place, and rest a while. I find the bush, the wilderness, wild places extremely restful and good and cleansing for the soul. So I'm going to read that verse again, and then we'll close it out. This is Jesus. And he said unto them, Come ye yourselves apart into a desert place, and rest a while. Thanks for listening, and have a blessed day.